The beacon had been dark for 300 years, and everyone wanted it to stay that way. Ambassador Elira Vex stood on the observation deck of Outpost Kessa 9, watching the black hole known as the Hollow Reach bend starlight into a slow, silent whirlpool. It was a beautiful, terrible thing. She had spent 2 years at this posting, the farthest edge of conquered territory, doing paperwork nobody read, and filing reports nobody answered. She had not expected today to be the day everything changed. The alarm started at 0600 station time. "Ambassador, we have a problem." Her aide, a thin Vossithani named Ren, burst into the room with his crest flattened in fear. "Sensors are picking up a Skarn swarm, a big one. They are already inside the outer perimeter." Elira felt the floor tilt beneath her, though the station had not moved at all. "That's not possible. The Skarn haven't been seen this deep in conquered space in decades." "Tell that to the swarm, Ambassador." She ran. By the time she reached the command center, the outer shields were already failing. On the main screen, thousands of small, dark shapes moved like a living cloud, consuming everything they touched. Hull plating, cargo pods, even the light itself seemed dimmer where they passed. The Skarn devourers did not fight like an army. They fed like a plague. "Get me the fleet," Elira said. "Now." The comms officer, a young woman whose hands were shaking, shook her head. "Ambassador, the nearest conquered fleet is 11 days away. We don't have 11 days. We don't have 11 hours. Elira closed her eyes for 1 second. Just one. Then she opened them and made a decision that would end her career, if she lived long enough to have one. "Open a channel," she said. "Wideband. Every frequency you have." "Ambassador, that's—" "I know what it is." The comms officer's fingers hovered over the console. "Ma'am, if this signal reaches Deathworlder territory, the Concord Accord forbids— The Concord Accord also forbids you from letting 300 people die because we were too afraid to ask for help from the wrong species," Elira snapped. "Open it." The channel opened with a soft chime, absurdly gentle against the chaos outside. "This is Ambassador Elira Vex of Outpost Kessa 9, Concord Diplomatic Corps," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We are under attack by a Skarn swarm. We have no combat vessels, we have no time. If anyone receives this signal, please, we need help." She did not specify who she meant by anyone. She did not need to. Every star chart in conquered space marked one system with a border no ship was supposed to cross, a small yellow star called Sol, and one label beneath it that had been repeated so many times it no longer felt like a warning. It felt like a superstition. Death World. Do not engage. She sent the signal anyway. 4 light-years away, aboard the human deep space cruiser Errant Kindness, a young comms officer named Diane Okafor sat up so fast she knocked over her coffee. Sir, you need to hear this." Fleet Commander Ray Osei walked over unbothered, the way he walked over to most things. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 40s with a scar above one eyebrow, and the calm of someone who had already survived the worst day of his life and come out the other side. He listened to the recording twice. "That's a Concord distress call," he said. "Yes, sir. And it's not addressed to the Concord fleet. It's addressed to anyone, which means it reached us because we were the only ship close enough to hear it." Diane hesitated. "Sir, we're not supposed to be in this sector. The Concord Border Treaty says—" "I know what the treaty says." Osei rubbed his jaw. "It also says the Concord doesn't want us anywhere near their people. Never explained why. Just handed us the line and told us not to cross it, like we're a dog that might bite the mailman." "Maybe we are," said Petty Officer Sam Ruiz from the pilot's chair, only half joking. Osei ignored him and looked at the star chart. Kessa 9 was 18 hours away at best speed. The Concord fleet, according to the timestamp buried in the distress signal, was 11 days out. 300 people. 18 hours versus 11 days. "Set a course," Osei said. The bridge went quiet. "Sir," Diane said carefully, "if we cross the border without an invitation, best case, we get expelled from conquered space forever. Worst case, Worst case, we find out why nobody's ever come back to tell us what the worst case actually is, Osei said. Set the course, Ruiz. Ruiz's hands moved over the console, but he glanced back once. You really think we can save them, Commander? I think somebody asked for help, and I'm not in the business of pretending I didn't hear it, Osei said. Move. The errant kindness turned. Its engines flaring blue-white against the dark and crossed a line that had not been crossed by a human ship in living memory. On Kessa 9, the shields failed completely 12 minutes later. Elira grabbed Ren by the arm and pulled him toward the maintenance corridor, as the outer hull began to groan under the weight of 100,000 small, hungry things eating their way inward. Emergency lights flickered red along the walls. Somewhere behind them, a section of the station simply stopped existing, swallowed whole. They're not stopping, Ren said, his voice breaking. Ambassador, they're not stopping. Why would anyone come here? Why would anyone? Because I asked them to, Elira said, though she wasn't entirely sure yet who they would turn out to be. They reached the shaft leading down to the lower decks, where a dozen survivors already huddled in the dark, engineers and researchers and one very frightened teenage intern who had been assigned to the station on what was supposed to be a quiet, uneventful rotation. Elira counted heads. 14, out of 300. She sat with her back against the cold metal wall and pulled up the last working comm panel, its screen cracked but still glowing faintly. This is Ambassador Vex, she said into it, not even sure if anyone was listening anymore. If you're out there, if you heard me, we're still alive. Not many of us, but we're alive. Static answered her. Long, empty static. Then, faintly, a voice cut through, human accented, calm in a way that made her chest ache with something she didn't have a name for yet. Ambassador Vex, this is Fleet Commander Ray Osei of the Errant Kindness. We heard you. We're 18 hours out, hold on. Ren stared at the panel like it had spoken in a language he'd never heard. In a way, it had. Deathworlders, he whispered. Ambassador, that's a Deathworlder ship. Elira didn't answer. She was too busy fighting back tears she hadn't expected, staring at a cracked screen that had just given 14 dying people something they hadn't had in over an hour. Hope. The station shuddered again, closer this time. On the small display, the swarm's outer edge had reached the command deck they'd fled from only minutes ago. 18 hours, they might not have 18 minutes. The comm panel crackled once more, and this time the voice that came through was not Osei's. It was flat, synthetic, broadcasting on every conquered frequency at once, drowning out every other signal in the sector like a hand closing over a throat. Death World vessel detected. Turn back. Do not proceed into conquered space. You will not be believed. Elira's blood went cold. That message had not come from any station she recognized. It had not come from the Skarn. It had come from somewhere deeper, somewhere older, buried in the Conquered's own dead relay network. An automated warning that should not have existed, broadcasting a threat to a rescue ship that hadn't even arrived yet. Something out here had been waiting 300 years for a human ship to cross this line, and it had just found out that one finally had. The warning message repeated 4 more times before Osei finally muted it. Sir, that signal isn't coming from any Concord ship, Diane said, staring at her console like it might bite her. The origin point is a dead relay, decommissioned decades ago according to the header data. Someone or something is still using it. Ghosts don't send warnings, Ruiz muttered from the pilot's seat. No, Osei said, but somebody who wants us to believe in ghosts might. He stood at the front viewport, watching the stars smear past as the errant kindness pushed deeper into space no human vessel had charted. Every few minutes, the ship's sensors picked up another automated buoy going dark, one after another, in a straight line pointing directly at their heading, as if something ahead of them was closing every door behind it. Dr. Anand, talk to me, Osei said. What are we flying into? Priya Anand, the ship's science officer, didn't look up from her console. She had the kind of focus that made people nervous, the sort of stillness that meant she'd already found something and was deciding how to say it. I've been analyzing wreckage signatures from old Concord distress logs buried in our archive, she said. There's a pattern. Every ship that's ever tried to make contact with conquered territory near this sector has gone dark within hours of crossing the border. Not destroyed, just gone. No debris, no final transmission, nothing. That's not possible, Ruiz said. Ships don't just vanish. They do if someone wants them to, Priya said quietly. Osei felt the old scar above his eyebrow ache, the way it sometimes did before something went badly wrong. How many ships? At least 6 that I can confirm, over 3 centuries. Priya finally looked up. Commander, I think the conquered border isn't a treaty line. I think it's a grave marker. The bridge went silent except for the low hum of the engines. They found the wreckage 4 hours later, drifting in a slow, silent orbit around a moon with no name on any human star chart. It was a Concorde relief fleet, 6 ships strong, and it looked like it had simply stopped. No hull breaches. No weapons damage, no fire scoring. The ships floated in perfect formation, engines cold as though their crews had walked away mid-shift and never come back. Get me a boarding team, Osei said. Sir, with respect, that's exactly the kind of decision that got 6 ships killed, Diane said. They weren't killed, Osei said. Not that we can tell. They disappeared, and I'd rather understand what we're dealing with before it decides to disappear us too. Priya volunteered to lead the team herself, along with Mateo Reyes, a young engineer with an easy laugh and steady hands, and 2 security officers. They crossed the gap in a shuttle small enough to slip between the drifting Concord hulls and boarded the lead ship through a maintenance airlock that opened without resistance, as though it had been waiting for someone to use it. Inside, the ship was untouched. Personal effects sat on desks. A half-finished meal had frozen solid on a table in the mess hall, but there were no bodies, no blood, no sign of struggle. It's like everyone just stood up and left, Mateo said, his voice hushed. Priya ran a scanner along the wall and frowned at the readout. There's a resonance signature here, faint but consistent across every compartment we've checked. I've never seen anything like it. Weapon? One of the security officers asked. I don't know what it is, Priya admitted. It doesn't match anything in our database. It's almost... She hesitated. It's almost biological, like the whole ship was breathing once. Mateo shivered, though the temperature hadn't changed. Can we not stay here longer than we have to? Priya didn't answer right away. She was staring at a data terminal that had somehow stayed powered, its screen glowing faintly in the dark. On it, a single message played on a silent loop, written in Concord script she couldn't fully translate, except for one phrase that repeated over and over. They are not what we were told. Back on Kessa 9, Illyra Vex sat in the dark with the last 14 survivors of her station, listening to the Skarn eat their way through another deck above them. The maintenance shaft groaned with every impact, dust sifting down onto their heads like slow snow. Ren had gone quiet an hour ago, curled against the wall staring at nothing. The teenage intern, whose name Illyra had finally learned was Sula, had cried herself into an exhausted, fitful sleep against her shoulder. Illyra pulled up the cracked comm panel one more time and recorded a message she didn't expect anyone to hear. Not really. It felt less like a distress call now, and more like a confession. If anyone finds this, she said quietly, I want it known that I'm the one who called the humans. I broke the accord. I don't regret it. She paused, glancing at Sula's sleeping face. There's something the Concord Council never told the rest of us about the Deathworlders. I only know pieces. Something happened, a long time ago, during the first contact attempt. A fleet was sent to make peaceful contact with Sol 3, and it never came back. Not destroyed. Gone, the same way our relief fleet is gone right now, I'd guess, if the timing on that dead relay's warning means anything. She swallowed hard. We don't warn people away from Deathworlders because they're violent. I've read enough sealed reports to know that's not it. We warn them away because whatever happened to that first fleet changed something, and the Council decided it was easier to bury the truth than explain it. I think that's the real reason nobody's supposed to talk to them directly. She let out a shaking breath. And I called them anyway, because I'd rather die knowing the truth than live pretending I don't. The panel crackled, and for one terrifying second, she thought the scarn had finally broken through to the shaft. Instead, a voice came through, faint but real. Ambassador Vex, this is the errant kindness. We picked up a fragment of your last transmission. Say again, please. What incident are you talking about? Elira's hand froze over the panel. She had not meant for that part of the message to transmit. She had not meant for anyone to hear it, least of all the very people it was about. Before she could answer, the shaft shuddered violently, and a section of the wall behind them tore open with a shriek of metal. Scarn poured through the gap in a black, hungry wave, and Sula woke up screaming. Ambassador! Ren shouted, pulling her back from the breach. We have to move now. Elira grabbed the comm panel, refusing to let it go even as she ran, shouting the only thing she had left to say into the static. We're out of time. Whatever you're bringing with you, bring it fast, because... The panel went dead in her hand, severed clean, as the Scarn swarm surged into the shaft behind them. And somewhere above, on the errant kindness, every sensor screen lit up at once with a reading no one on the bridge had ever seen before. The swarm, according to every instrument they had just stopped chasing the station. It had turned all at once in a single coordinated motion no insect-like hive species should have been capable of, and set a new course. Straight toward the human ship. The proximity alarm screamed through the bridge a full second before Diane could even open her mouth to report it. Swarm inbound bearing 020 closing fast, she shouted. Commander, they're not going for the station anymore. They're coming straight at us. Osei was already moving. Recall the boarding team now. Ruiz, get us clear of the wreckage field. We can't maneuver tangled up in 6 dead hulls. Copy that. Ruiz's hands flew across the console, and the errant kindness banked hard away from the drifting Concord fleet, engines flaring. On the shuttle, Priya grabbed Mateo by the arm and hauled him toward the airlock. We need to go now. The terminal. I need 30 more seconds to copy this data. You have 10. Priya was already sealing her suit. Move, Reyes. They made it back to the shuttle bay with the swarm less than 2 minutes out. A dark, roiling mass visible even through the reinforced viewport, blotting out the stars behind it like a slow-moving storm front. Osei watched it grow on the main screen and felt something settle in his chest, the particular calm that came right before a fight he couldn't avoid. Options, he said. We could try to outrun them, Diane offered, though she didn't sound like she believed it. They match our sublight speed, Priya said, breathless, jogging onto the bridge still half in her boarding suit. I clocked it on the shuttle sensors. If we run, they run with us, and we lead them straight back toward the Concord border and every other ship in this sector. Then we don't run. Osei looked at the swarm data scrolling past on his console. Individually, the Scarn were small, fast, and nearly mindless, but together they moved like a single organism, adapting, coordinating, learning. Concord ships fought them with heavy shielding and overwhelming firepower, when they fought them at all. The errant kindness had neither. What it had was a crew that had spent years fighting pirates, debris storms, and worse, with half the ship's systems held together by stubbornness and duct tape. Ruiz, I want evasive patterns, nothing predictable. Diane, rig every spare drone and cargo pod we've got with emergency beacons and set them to broadcast heat signatures matching our engine core. Osei's voice was steady, almost casual the way it got when he was thinking fastest. We're going to give them decoys to chew on. That'll burn through half our drone reserve, Diane said. Then it'll burn through half our drone reserve. Osei turned to Priya. Can you rig the shuttle's old resonance scanner to broadcast a false structural signature? Make it look like the ship's hull is failing in a specific section? Priya's eyes lit up despite herself. You want to lure them somewhere and then seal them in? I want to lure them somewhere and then space them, Osei said. Get it done. The plan should not have worked. By any Concord military doctrine, it shouldn't have even been attempted. But the Scarn swarm, drawn by the false signal, poured into the cargo bay Priya had rigged, chasing a signature that promised easy, wounded prey, and Osei blew the outer bay doors the instant the last stragglers crossed the threshold. Vacuum did what weapons couldn't. Half the swarm was gone in seconds, spinning silently out into the dark. But half was not all, and the rest scattered, faster and angrier, tearing at the hull with 100 small claws, searching for another way in. "Hull breach, deck 3, Diane shouted. "They're cutting through the outer plating." "Security to deck 3, Osei ordered. "Anand, get Reyes and get down there. Help seal that breach before it spreads." Mateo was already moving before the order finished, grabbing a welding rig from the nearest supply locker. He and Priya reached deck 3 to find a 2-meter gash torn through the hull, atmosphere screaming out into space, and 3 of the Kessa 9 survivors, evacuated aboard just an hour earlier, trapped in the corridor beyond it. One of them was Ren. "Get back!" Mateo shouted, but the Vostani was frozen, staring at the tear in the hull as a dozen Skarn poured through it, drawn by the rush of escaping air and warmth. Mateo didn't think. He moved. He threw himself between Ren and the swarm, swinging the welding rig like a club. More instinct than skill, buying 2-3 seconds while Priya dragged Ren and the others back through the emergency bulkhead. A Skarn's claw caught Mateo across the side before the bulkhead sealed, dropping him hard against the deck, blood already soaking through his suit. "Man down deck 3. Priya's voice cracked over the comm, raw with panic in a way that surprised even her. "I need medical, now!" Elira Vex, huddled in the medbay where she and the other survivors had been brought, heard the call and watched through the observation window as they carried Mateo in, pale and bleeding. A stranger who had thrown himself in front of an alien he'd never met, from a species that had spent 300 years too afraid to even speak to his own. She didn't understand it. Not the tactics, not the sacrifice, not any of it. Why would he do that? She said quietly, to no one in particular. Ren is Vosathani. His people voted against the last 3 Deathworlder outreach proposals. He would have said no to ever meeting a human, if anyone had asked him. "Maybe nobody asked Reyes to think about any of that," said Dr. Annan's voice, tight and distracted, from across the medbay as she worked. "Maybe he just saw someone about to die." Elira had no answer for that. She only had the sight of Mateo Reyes on the table, unconscious, a stranger's blood on his hands that wasn't his own, and a growing, uncomfortable feeling that everything her government had ever told her about Deathworlders had been built on fear of the wrong thing entirely. The swarm broke off 20 minutes later, retreating into the dark as suddenly as it had come, and the errant kindness limped away from the hollow reach with a wounded hull, a wounded engineer, and 14 rescued survivors crowded into a ship built for a crew of 40. Osi stood over Mateo's bed in the medbay long after the fighting stopped, watching the younger man's chest rise and fall. Too shallow, too slow. "He's stable," Priya said, exhausted, wiping blood from her hands. "For now. The wound itself isn't the problem, Commander. It's healing faster than it should, honestly. It's something else." "What do you mean, something else?" Priya pulled up a readout on the medical console, her brow furrowed in a way Osei had learned to take seriously. His vitals spiked right before the swarm broke off, not from the injury. Something in his blood work lit up like a flare the second the Skarn got close to him, and then the whole swarm turned and ran. She looked up, and for the first time since Osei had known her, she looked genuinely unsettled. "Commander, I don't think the Skarn retreated because of anything we did. I think they retreated because of something in him." On the console screen, buried in the noise of Mateo's vitals, a strange, unfamiliar pattern pulsed once, twice, then went still, waiting. Mateo's eyes moved beneath closed lids, and for just a moment, his monitor spiked into readings that didn't match any known human physiology at all. The medical console screamed a warning at 0300 ship time, and Priya Anand was at Mateo's bedside before she was even fully awake. "Talk to me," Osei said, arriving seconds later, still pulling on his jacket. "His readings are climbing again. Heart rate, brain activity, everything." Priya's hands moved fast over the console, pulling up comparison charts. "Commander, I want to show you something, and I need you to keep an open mind." She pulled up 2 data sets side by side. One was Mateo's current blood work, The other was an old scan buried deep in the ship's archive, labeled only with a string of numbers and a single word: Ashbourne. "What am I looking at?" Osei asked. "A partial match. 91% correlation between Reyes's current physiology and a genetic marker in our archive that I didn't even know we had until it flagged itself an hour ago." Priya looked up at him. "Commander, this data wasn't collected by us. It's old. Older than any mission record we have. I think it came from something salvaged decades ago and just never got properly cataloged. Nobody's looked at it in years." Elira Vex, standing in the doorway where she'd been quietly watching, stepped forward. "Ashbourne," she repeated softly. "I've heard that word before. Once. In a sealed briefing I wasn't supposed to see." Both of them turned to her. "Tell us," Osei said. Elira hesitated, glancing at Mateo's still form on the bed, the faint, unnatural shimmer beneath his closed eyelids. "I told you, back on the station, that I'd read fragments of something about a first contact incident. I didn't tell you everything, because I didn't think you'd believe me. And honestly, I wasn't sure I believed it myself." She took a slow breath. 300 years ago, the Concord sent a diplomatic fleet to Sol 3. It was supposed to be humanity's first real contact with an alien civilization. Peaceful, careful, everything done exactly by the book. "And?" Priya prompted. "And the fleet never came back," Elira said. "Not destroyed, not defeated. Gone. The same way our relief fleet at Kessa 9 was gone when you found it. No wreckage, no survivors, no message." She wrapped her arms around herself. "The council of that era buried the entire incident, erased most of the records. What little survived was locked away under a classification so old most current officials don't even know it exists. I only found a fragment of it because a mentor of mine made a mistake once and left a file open." "What did the fragment say?" Osei asked. "That the fleet didn't disappear," Elira said quietly. "It changed. Something about the contact between us and them didn't just fail. It transformed. The file used the word Ashbourne exactly once, as a classification for the crew members most affected. And then the file just stopped, redacted." She looked at Mateo. "I think that's what's happening to him. I think it's happening again." Mateo woke an hour later, gasping, his eyes snapping open to reveal irises that had shifted from warm brown to something closer to burnished gold, faintly luminous in the low light of the medbay. "Mateo?" Priya's voice was gentle, careful. "Can you hear me?" He blinked slowly, disoriented, his gaze sliding across the room without quite focusing. When he spoke, his voice carried a strange, layered quality, as though two voices were speaking the same words a half-second apart. "Shah Velen. Ath Koran Sa Velen." The room went silent. "That's not English," Osei said carefully. "Anand." Priya was already running the recording through the ship's translation matrix, her expression tightening with every second that passed. "It's matching something. Barely. The translator's cross-referencing it against Concord linguistic archives, but the closest match is." She stared at the screen. "It's tagging it as pre-Concord, a dialect that predates the current Concord language by centuries. Nobody's spoken it in 500 years, according to this." "Then how does Reyes know it?" Osei demanded. "I don't think he does," Priya said quietly. "I don't think that's him talking." Mateo's eyes fixed suddenly on Elira, sharp and lucid in a way that made her step back instinctively. He spoke again, this time in halting broken Concord standard, his voice still carrying that strange double resonance. "You," he said. "You called us. Good. It is time someone did." "Mateo, it's me. It's Priya. Can you hear me? Do you know where you are?" Priya reached for his hand, but he pulled it back, staring at his own fingers like he'd never seen them before. "I know exactly where I am," he said, and this time his own voice broke through, frightened, unmistakably his. "Priya, what's happening to me? I can feel. There's something else, something old. It's not trying to hurt me, but it's here, and I don't know how to make it stop." We're going to figure this out, Osei said, stepping closer, keeping his voice level even as every instinct told him this situation was sliding somewhere none of them could control. You're not alone in this, just breathe. Mateo's breathing hitched, and for a moment the gold faded from his eyes, leaving them brown and human and terrified. There's a fleet, he whispered. I can see it. Not with my eyes. I don't know how to explain it. There's a fleet, and it never left, and it's been waiting this whole time, and it's so tired, Commander. It's been waiting so long. Illyra's breath caught. The first contact fleet, she said. You're saying it's still out there? It's not gone, Mateo said, his voice raw. It never went anywhere. It's just not exactly a fleet anymore. Not exactly anything anymore. I don't understand it. I don't understand any of this. Osei crouched down to Mateo's eye level, keeping his voice steady, an anchor in the room. Then we're going to find out together. Whatever this is, whatever's in you, we're not leaving you to face it alone. You hear me, Reyes? Mateo managed a shaky nod, gripping Osei's arm hard enough to bruise. The medical console chimed softly behind them, an alert neither Priya nor Osei had triggered. On the main screen, a new signal had appeared, faint but unmistakable, broadcasting from deep within the hollow reach, a place their sensors had marked as empty on every previous scan. It was answering in the same pre-conquered dialect Mateo had spoken minutes before, 3 words, repeated over and over across every frequency the ship could receive. He has returned. He has returned. He has returned. Illyra stared at the screen, her face draining of color. That signal, she said slowly, is coming from exactly where the original Concorde fleet vanished 300 years ago. Osei looked at Mateo, whose gold-flecked eyes had opened again, fixed now on something none of the rest of them could see. Something's waking up out there, Osei said quietly. And I think it just realized we're already on our way. The hollow reach had always looked empty on every scan the errant kindness had ever run. That changed the moment they crossed back into it, following the signal, and something the size of a small moon shimmered into existence directly ahead of them. Report, Osei said, gripping the back of Ruiz's chair as the bridge lit up with alarms. Commander, that thing wasn't there 30 seconds ago, Ruiz said, voice tight. It's not cloaked. I'd have caught a cloak. It's like it just decided to exist. The vessel was enormous, ancient, its hull an impossible fusion of 2 architectures Osei had never seen combined, sweeping organic curves that reminded him of old conquered battleship designs, threaded through with hard, blocky segments that looked unmistakably, achingly human, like something out of Earth's earliest deep space projects, grown into and swallowed by something far larger. Priya stared at her console, hands frozen over the controls. Commander, I'm reading life signs, thousands of them, but they're not registering as fully organic. It's like the whole ship is alive and the crew is part of it, and I can't tell anymore where the ship ends and the people begin. In the med bay, Mateo sat bolt upright, gold bleeding fully into his eyes, his voice steadying into that strange double resonance once more. That's them, he said. That's the fleet. Illyra, at his side, felt her hands go cold. The first contact fleet. 300 years, and it's just been sitting out here this whole time. Not sitting, Mateo said. Waiting. Watching the border. Guarding it. He winced, pressing a hand to his temple. There's so much of it I can't. It's not a memory, it's 1,000 memories layered on top of each other. I don't know how to. The comm system crackled to life on its own, cutting through every other channel on the ship, and a voice filled the bridge, the med bay, every corridor at once. It was not one voice. It was a chorus, dozens of tones woven together, some clearly human, some unmistakably Concorde, speaking in perfect unison. Errant kindness, Fleet Commander Ray Osei. We have waited a long time to say this correctly. Welcome home. Osei's jaw tightened. Identify yourself. We were the Concorde vessel Oral Vantis, first contact fleet, dispatched to Sol 3 centuries ago. We were also the human research vessel Meridian, sent to meet us halfway. We do not have separate names anymore. We share one. We are the Warden. We are, The bridge was dead silent. "You're saying you're both fleets," Priya said slowly. "Human and conquered. Merged." "Merged is a small word for a very large thing, Dr. Anand. But yes, close enough." Elira stepped toward the nearest comm panel, her voice shaking. "Why? What happened out here 300 years ago? Why did the Council bury it? Why erase every record?" There was a pause, long enough that Osei wondered if the connection had failed. Then the voice returned, quieter now, threaded with something that sounded almost like grief. "Because we found something out here that the galaxy was not ready to know about, and the only way to stop it from getting free was for both crews to become something new, something that could hold a line neither species could hold alone." The Council of that era panicked. They did not understand what we had become, and rather than admit that conquered and human crews had joined together to save countless worlds, they chose to erase us, quietly, and warn every future generation away from Deathworlders, so that no one would ever ask the question that led here. "What question?" Osei demanded. "Why the humans never came back either." Mateo gasped in the med bay, doubling over as a fresh wave of memory, not his own, tore through him. Priya caught him before he fell, and when he lifted his head, his voice was pure warden, layered and ancient. "There's a reason the Skarn fled the moment they sensed me," he said. "The Skarn aren't mindless scavengers, not really. They're refugees. They flee something far older than themselves, something the Warden has held contained out here for 300 years. That's why they've been pushing deeper into conquered space lately. Whatever we've been holding back is starting to wake up, and it's stronger than it's ever been." "What is it?" Elira whispered. "We do not have a name for it that translates cleanly," the Warden's chorus voice answered. "The oldest Concord archives, before they were sealed, called it the Unmaking. It does not conquer. It does not consume like the Skarn. It simply erases, world by world, mind by mind. And it has been testing the wall we built around it for 3 centuries, waiting for the day our strength finally failed." Osei felt the weight of the moment settle over the bridge like a physical thing. "And it's failing now." "Yes," the Warden said. "Which is why your engineer's arrival matters more than either of you understand. A fragment of the original human crew has always lived on within us, but it has grown faint over 3 centuries. Mateo Reyes carries a genetic echo of that original crew, passed down through a bloodline none of you knew existed until tonight. His presence has begun to restore what we had lost. But restoration is not the same as strength. We need more than an echo. We need a crew willing to stand the line as the first 2 crews once did." Elira looked between Osei and Mateo, her mind reeling. "You're asking them to become like you, to merge with, whatever this is." "We are asking for volunteers," the Warden corrected gently. "Not conscripts. What was done to the first crews was not entirely a choice, and it cost us dearly. We will not repeat that mistake. But the wall is failing, Ambassador Vex, and if it falls, the Unmaking will not stop at the Hollow Reach. It will not stop at the conquered border. It will not stop at Sol." Osei looked at Mateo, pale and shaking but standing on his own 2 feet, gold-flecked eyes steady despite everything. He looked at Priya, at Diane, at Ruiz, at the 14 frightened survivors from Kessa 9 crowded into a ship built for a fraction of their number, at Elira Vex, who had broken every rule she'd ever been taught rather than let people die quietly and alone. "You said you need a crew willing to die again," Osei said quietly. "That's what this comes down to." "Yes, Commander," the Warden said, and for the first time the chorus of voices sounded almost human in its exhaustion, its hope. "The wall is failing. We need a crew willing to die again." Behind Osei, on the long-range sensor display, a new reading bloomed into existence at the far edge of the Hollow Reach, vast and formless, pressing steadily against a barrier that had held for 300 years and was now, for the first time anyone alive could remember, beginning to crack. Nobody spoke for a long moment after the Warden's request hung in the air. Osei was the one who finally broke the silence, and when he did, his voice carried none of the doubt that filled the rest of the bridge. You said this isn't a conscription. That means every person on this ship gets to choose for themselves. Yes, the warden answered. Then give me a minute with my crew, Osei said. We don't decide things like this for each other, not on my ship. He gathered them in the mess hall 10 minutes later. Every human aboard the Errant Kindness, along with Elira and the survivors from Kessa 9 crowded near the doorway listening. Osei didn't dress it up. He told them exactly what the warden had told him, exactly what it might cost, exactly how little anyone actually understood about what merging with an ancient guardian intelligence would mean for the people who volunteered. I'm not ordering anyone to do this, he said. I want that understood clearly. If the wall out there falls, we run. We warn every world we can reach and we let the conquered and whoever else figure out what comes next. That's a real option. Nobody who chooses it is a coward. Diane spoke first, arms crossed, jaw tight. And if we run and it doesn't stop at the border like the warden said? Then everyone we love dies anyway, just later. And somewhere else, Ruiz said quietly. Except this time nobody was standing between them and it. Priya looked over at Mateo, still pale, still healing, gold flickering faintly behind his eyes whenever he blinked too slowly. He didn't choose this. It happened to him because he threw himself in front of an alien he'd never met, because that's who he is. I'm not about to let him stand out here alone because the rest of us were too scared to stand next to him. Mateo managed a small, exhausted laugh. For the record, throwing myself in front of things seems to be a running theme this week. Then let's make it a group activity, Priya said, and though her voice shook, her hand found his and held on. One by one, the crew spoke. Not everyone agreed to merge, and Osei made sure that was understood as no less honorable a choice. But when the final count came in, 7 of them, Osei, Priya, Mateo, Diane, Ruiz, and 2 of the security officers who had fought the Skarn on Deck 3, chose to stand the line. Elira stepped forward last, surprising everyone, herself included. I'm conquered, she said. This wall was built by both our peoples once and buried by mine alone. I'm not letting that be the last thing my species did out here. Osei studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Welcome aboard, Ambassador. The warden guided them through what came next, and it was neither instant nor painless. Elira would remember it later as something closer to a long, honest conversation than a transformation. A joining of memory and will that asked rather than took. That left room, always, for a person to remain a person. She felt herself expand into something larger without losing the shape of who she was, felt 300 years of concord and human memory settle alongside her own, like old letters finally read. She understood, in a way words could never have taught her, why the Council had panicked all those centuries ago. It was not fear of monsters. It was fear of wonder too large to control, too large to explain, too large to keep quiet about. She understood, too, exactly why the Skarn fled from something like this. Not because it was a predator, because it was a wall. And walls did not attack. Walls simply held. The unmaking arrived at the edge of the hollow reach an hour later, and it was unlike anything Osei had ever imagined fighting. It had no ships, no weapons, no voice. It simply pressed against the barrier the warden had spent 3 centuries maintaining, and wherever it touched, stars seemed to dim, faint and distant, as though the universe itself were being asked politely to forget they had ever existed. The battle that followed was not fought with missiles or shields, not in any way Ruiz or Diane had ever trained for. It was fought with will, with memory, with the stubborn refusal of a handful of humans and one changed conquered ambassador to let go of what mattered to them. Mateo, at the center of it, felt the full weight of the original crew's sacrifice settle onto his shoulders, and for a terrifying moment, felt himself begin to dissolve into it. Felt the boundary between Mateo Reyes and the ancient echo within him start to blur past recovery. Mateo. Priya's voice cut through the storm of borrowed memory, sharp and real and entirely hers. Don't disappear into it. Carry it. There's a difference. He held on to the sound of her voice like a rope thrown across a widening gap, and slowly, Deliberately, he found the shape of himself again inside the vastness the warden had opened to him. Not erased, not replaced. Carried forward, on his own terms. A bridge rather than a replacement. Together, the errant kindness, the ancient warden, and 7 ordinary people who had chosen, willingly, to become something larger, held the line. Not through overwhelming force, through the same stubborn, aching refusal to let a stranger die alone that had defined every choice Osei's crew had made since the moment Diane first played Elira's distress call on the bridge. The unmaking did not conquer that night. It receded, slowly, testing the wall one more time and finding it, against every likelihood, still standing. 3 months later, Elira Vex stood before the full Concord Council for the first time in her career, not as a disgraced ambassador awaiting punishment, but as the first official liaison to a species the Council had spent 300 years hiding from. She told them everything: the buried records, the warden, the unmaking, the 7 people who had chosen to become something new rather than let an old fear keep writing the rules. The Council did not apologize easily. Councils rarely do. But 3 days later, for the first time in recorded history, a Concord vessel crossed openly into Sol system space, carrying not a warning, but an invitation. Aboard the repaired errant kindness, Osei stood on the bridge beside Mateo, whose eyes had settled into a permanent quiet gold, a mark of what he now carried rather than a wound. Priya worked beside him at engineering, the two of them rarely more than an arm's length apart these days. Elira had stayed aboard as promised, the ship's newest and strangest crew member, equal parts diplomat and something else now too. "You ever regret answering that call?" Osei asked her, watching the stars slide by. Elira considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything now. "No," she said finally. "I regret that it took my people 300 years and 1 broken accord to learn what should have been obvious from the start." "What's that?" "That you don't warn people away from Deathworlders because they're dangerous," she said. "You warn people away from them because once you understand what they're actually willing to do for a stranger, you can't ever go back to pretending you don't owe them anything." Near the edge of the hollow reach, the old warning buoys had been replaced one by one, with new beacons carrying a different message, broadcast quietly across every frequency for any ship, human or conquered or otherwise, that happened to pass close enough to hear it. "Humans on watch. You are safe here." And far below, at the heart of the warden, 7 voices that were no longer entirely separate and never quite one, kept a promise 3 centuries old, standing exactly where they had chosen to stand, for exactly as long as anyone might need them.